So we're finally going to get into creating menus and talking about UI in our game. And we're first going to start with the start menu. That seems like a good place to begin, right? So this video is going to kind of pave the groundwork for working with UI in future videos, as well as go through the nuts and bolts of getting our start menu to finally work. So why don't we go ahead and preview what we're going to be doing in this video here. You can see here I have a looks like a start menu, pretty good, or rather it's pretty simple, but it still functions. So I'm going to go ahead and just play the game. I'll maximize. So when we press play, we're given this menu where we can select one player or two players. If we only added functionality to one player at this point, and if we click on one player, our screen fades to white, and then after a brief amount of time, obstacles start spawning in our game. All right, so that's what we're going to be achieving. We're going to be setting up buttons, a white overlay, give our game a little title, and when you click on one of our buttons, it does all the logic necessary to begin our game in earnest. All right, so why don't we figure out how we can code this? So let's go over what we're going to need to achieve with our menus over the next few videos right here. All right. Well, first we're going to need to build our menus in the same scene as our play scene. We're not, since our game is so simple, we're not going to really need to create different scenes just for our menus. In more complex games, that's a standard practice to create scenes just for menus. But in our simple game, since our camera really never moves and we don't have too many active objects in our scene, we're just going to build our menu as an overlay on top of our playfield. And we're going to also have to build a utility that will fade overlays from transparent to opaque. So that white fade that you saw in the preview earlier. And then we're going to need to build a start menu. And then eventually we're going to get over into game over or restart UI menus or just regular menus. And then we need to display our playtime eventually. And then we're also going to add a little bit of an effect of a red overlay as the playfield shrinks. So we're not going to cover all of these in this video, but that's what we're going to be covering in the next few videos that cover UI creation. So why don't we just start with building out our start menu. But before we can even begin coding, we need to be familiar with our UI creation tools that Unity has for us. So in this section of the outliner, I've linked pages that take us to Unity's website, which, okay, there we go. It's up. That will kind of tell us about how we can get started with making our UIs. So if you're not familiar with UI creation, I definitely recommend watching about 20 or 30 minutes of these videos I have listed. These 5 first videos will basically be what you need to kind of get used to creating the different elements of our UI menu. So I'm going to assume in the later portions of our videos that you already have watched these and have a good understanding of how to create the UI elements that we'll be coding with and building ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and let you watch those videos. And when you get done, we're going to come back here and make our start menu. So go ahead and pause this video and check those out. So welcome back to the video. Hopefully you learned a lot while messing around with UI tools in the videos linked above. So we're just going to get started with our code now. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a public void start game function in our game manager class. So I'm going to pull this around here. You can follow along with the outliner on your own. But I'm going to go and navigate to my scripts folder, and I'm going to double click on my game manager and bring up my handy dandy game manager script. Let me zoom in so we can see it a little bit easier. And we're just going to come down here right underneath void update and above void game over. And I want to make this a public variable. That'll be important whenever we start attaching these functions to buttons in our UI. We're going to call this start game. For right now, we're going to leave it blank. I just wanted to public void. I forgot to add the void there. So we're going to be calling a public void start game function. whenever we click a button in our UI that you saw at the beginning of the video. So now we're going to just go ahead and get into building the actual start screen UI for our game here. All right, so this is going to take into account all those new tools like the canvas and image and text elements that you learned about. So why don't we just hop into it and go ahead and make a new canvas. So we'll go to Game Object UI and we'll make a canvas. And why don't we go ahead and just call this our UI canvas. This canvas is going to be the parent canvas that will house all other menus or UI elements for our game. But we're going to change one thing before we continue onwards. And we're going to go into our canvas scaler over here on the right side. And we're going to change this to scale with screen size. Scale with screen size right there. That'll help keep our UI elements at the same proportion no matter what aspect ratio you're using for your game. So with my UI canvas now named and my scale mode changed, we're going to create a UI image. So I can right click on my UI canvas, go to UI, and we're just going to make an image. And we're going to call this image white fade image. This is going to be the guy that fades our game from white to our game scene. So I'm going to come in here and you'll notice that we have this canvas outliner now, and we're going to click on our 2D dongle up there, go into flat orthographic mode so we can have better control over positioning the aspects of my UI. And just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to go to my environment game object, and I'm just going to deactivate it for now. Then I'll get rid of all the mountains that we were using. So after I call my image white fade image, I need to reposition it to the corners of my canvas so it fills up my entire play field. So after I've positioned all that, I'm going to leave the center pivot point right there. And then I'm going to go over to my rect transform component over here. And I'm going to set its anchor points to all four corners. Here's a little, that's a quick hotkey, a quick preset that allow us to set my anchor points for my image. You can see them right here. These little white brackets there, we're going to set them to the four corners of my canvas. And that'll allow me to stretch out my white canvas no matter what size our play field is. All right, so that'll keep our white overlay stretched correctly. And that'll be a very important image when we start using fade effects to begin and end our games. All right, so we're going to add a few more elements to my UI canvas. So with my UI canvas selected up here, I'm going to right click and we're going to add another canvas underneath my UI canvas. And we're going to call this canvas Start Menu Canvas. All right, so after we name it Start Menu Canvas, you'll see that the scalar non-root canvases will not be scaled. So that means we're going to have to kind of control the anchor points for this canvas. So with my Start Menu Canvas selected, we're going to make sure that it's set to the four corners preset right here. That'll keep our parented or child start canvas in the same scale as our root parent UI canvas. So this is going to be an important canvas to have because it's going to contain all of the UI elements for my start menu. And later we'll make a game over menu that will have its own set of elements for restarting the game and trying again. So great. We got our start menu canvas made. Next, we're going to create a new UI element underneath my start menu called text. And this guy right here is going to be basically the title of my game. So I'm going to position it towards the top of my screen. Maybe using my rect transform tool up here at the top of the screen. You can see it right there. We're going to position my text box. And I'm going to come over here in my inspector. And I'm going to set a few things. I'm going to give it a new text. I'm just going to call this top down shooter. We're going to increase maybe the font size to maybe like 30. If you wanted to download a font from thefont.com or wherever you like to get your fonts, you can actually import that font into Unity and then drag and drop that font right over here to the font. So you can give any type of font you want to your game. So I'll let you guys, that's a pretty easy thing to do. So I'll just skip over it for the sake of brevity. And I'm going to go to my paragraph and I'm going to center it in the center and center it in the top and down. All right. So there we have my title for my game. It looks luxurious. But we're not done with it because we have to name it. So we're going to say title. We'll call that text, title text. And we'll position the anchors to the top middle. So my anchors are going to exist right at the top and then in the middle of my screen. That way, it'll always kind of stay at the top of my screen and centered, no matter how big or small I scale my screen. All right, perfect. So under my start menu canvas, I'm going to make two more elements. I'm going to make two buttons. So we're going to make a button right there. And why don't we go ahead and call this one player button. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of make it my own size. And you can get an idea of what it's going to look like if you have your game window visible while you're kind of controlling it here. So I'm going to put that button in the bottom left. You're welcome to put it anywhere you want. And if I expand my player one button up here in my inspector, you can see that I have a text, and it'll be the same kind of text material or text element as our title text. So I'm going to give this thing a name called one player text. And then in my inspector with my one player text button selected, I'll call this one player. And again, you can adjust the font. And looks like you already got the right kind of alignment going on. And then we're going to set not the text anchors, so we can go ahead and collapse our button. We're going to select our button and we're going to set its anchor to the bottom right of our screen. So no matter how big our screen gets, our button's going to kind of stay anchored to that bottom left corner. And then we can go into free aspect mode, and we can see that they're kind of positioning themselves. I mean, that looks bad, but I don't know of any, unless you were developing for mobile, I don't know how many displays would be that weird looking. But for the most part, it's going to take care of any kind of PC related aspect or traditional aspect ratio. And then we're going to duplicate one player button, and we're going to make the two player button out of this. That'll be useful later on in our game. So two player button, and then we'll just position it roughly symmetrically across. And then I have to go down here and adjust the text that's inside my two player button, and I'm going to change its name to two player. All right, great. And then I'm going to actually anchor my two player button to the bottom right of my screen using this preset right here in my rect transform component. So we basically got our start menu built. All right. Now, why don't we get to creating some functionality when we click? If I press play, I can click these two menus right here. So we'll primarily be using our UI with the mouse button. And right now, all we're doing is basically just clicking our buttons. The only thing that happens is we get this nice confirm overlay. And you can tweak that over here in the button script. You can give it any kind of background you want over here in the source, so you can load in your own UI, your own sprites, so you can make the button round, or you can import your own PNG files and create your own background. You can also control the fade duration, so if you want a longer fade, say you want to fade 0.5, and you can change the colors when it's highlighted or not. So this is its normal color. If it's highlighted, maybe we can make it go pink. And then if it gets pressed, we'll make it go a darker pink. So let's look what happens whenever we press play now. We hover over one player, it's pink. And then if we select it, there we go. We see we have a little bit more control over the graphical presentation of our buttons. All right, so I'm just going to kind of leave that as it is. I might go back and change it a little bit just to make it like it was. Reset my fade duration to 0.1. And it's basically like it was. All right, so now why don't we get into some of the code so when we press one player, we actually begin the game. So in order to get our game to function correctly, we already see something maybe happening in my console here. When I was working earlier, it said that I had collected a power up. I don't know if I'm going to be lucky enough to hit a power up now. But basically, even though our canvas is going right here, and I'll show you what happens. So we press the start, but if we disable our start menu and disable our white, guess what? Our game was still going. Okay. So we gotta figure out how we can keep the game from going while we're stuck in our start menu. All right, so I'm going to unpause that, and for right now, I'm going to unhide my canvas. And why don't I get my environment back? Yeah, there we go. Let's get out of 2D mode. And now that I've built my UI, I can kind of go back into a view I'm more comfortable with. And I think I need to change. Yeah, let's change the boundary amount because it was way too vicious. So basically, what we need to do. Wow, things are a little bit slower in this version of the game. So why don't I speed up some stuff? Let's call that 7. Let's call that 20. So basically what I need to do is I need to keep obstacles from spawning as soon as the game begins. And I need to disable the player so we're not able to move the player around as we're selecting stuff in our start menu. Our boundary will be fine because there will not be any obstacles to tweak it at all because we will disable spawning. So what we'll do is we'll go to my game manager, and down here at my power up spawn controller, we'll uncheck its enable and we'll uncheck the enable for my obstacle spawn. And we're going to also select my player right here, and we're going to deactivate it as well, disable it. So when we start our game, nothing's happening. Our play field is just kind of there, and we're kind of safe right now. So I'm going to reactivate my canvas like so. And now that we have our scene set up where we're not actually playing the game while we have this start screen overlay going, why don't we actually get into some of the logic behind creating a nice start screen? So I'm going to go over to my game manager script, and we have a nice public void start game function that we made a little bit earlier before we actually constructed our start menu. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to adjust the fade of white over time. Okay? So before we get into any kind of UI stuff, make sure you've included the Unity engine.ui library. So make sure you have this at the top of your script. This will allow us access to different types of functions we'll need when using the UI within our game manager. So with that library included, we're going to make a new public variable up here. And I'm going to make it right under here, and I'm going to kind of separate it because these are going to be UI public variables. So we're going to call this public, and we're going to call it of type graphic, and then we're going to call it white fade image. I'll hit Control S to save that. And why don't we go back into my game manager now, and now we have this white fade image with none attached. What we're going to do is we're going to go to my UI canvas, so expand that, find your white fade image that we created. All right, and we're going to just drag and drop that into our game manager white fade image empty box right there. This will give us direct access to this white fade image, and then we'll be able to adjust its alpha channel through our code. That's basically this little attribute right here in the color. We're going to adjust its alpha or its transparency. And there's a really nice function that allows us to do that. So after we've made that variable and assigned it our white fade image graphic, let's go back down to public void start game. And we're going to say, you know what? Why don't we create a function that handles the fading separately instead of hard coding it into our void start game function? Because we're going to also be fading maybe the red overlay, or maybe we just want a little bit more of a template fade function that we can call in other situations. So what we'll do is we'll go down here, and I'm underneath the void power up. I'm going to make a fade function. I'm going to call this void fade overlay. That'll be the name of my function. But I'm going to create two parameters here. The first will be a boolean called fade. This will be a true or false, saying do we want to fade in or do we want to fade out. And then we're going to create a new parameter of type graphic, and we're going to pass in the fade image that we want to fade in our particular fade overlay function. So in this case, we're going to be passing in our white fade overlay graphic that we've been working with. All right, so why don't we go ahead and make some code that controls the fade. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say if fade equals true, meaning if the parameter that we pass in, so we say fade overlay, we want to fade out, and we want to pass in the fade image. So if fade equals true, then we're going to fade out, or I think, let me see. I just know that we're going to do fade image. We're going to use our fade image parameter, and we're going to call a new function dot crossfade alpha. And crossfade alpha takes two or three different parameters right here. The first being what do you want to fade to, what value do you want to fade to, how long do you want the fade to take, and if you want to ignore time scaling or not. So what we're going to enter here is we want to fade to 1 in the alpha channel over 2 seconds, and we're going to ignore the time scaling. So basically what that's going to do is if we select our white fade image and go to our color, so our alpha, 1, this value is normalized. Remember we talked about normalized values. So right now our alpha is 255. What we'll do is we'll fade all the way to 1, which will be 255. So we're going to be fading out in this instance. But we also want to add functionality to fade in. So we'll say if or else if fade equals false. And we're just going to copy the code right here. We're not going to change hardly anything about this code except for one thing. So if we're fading is false, we're going to fade out, meaning we're going to go from opaque to transparent. All right. So with my fade overlay function now made, I can fade in and out over a set period of time. And to call that function, it's going to be pretty easy. In my start game, we're going to call my fade function we just made. We're going to say fade overlay. That's the function we just made. And we're going to say false, meaning we want to fade out, meaning we want that white image to gradually go transparent. And what do we want to fade? Actually, what do we want to actually fade? We want to fade our white fade image that we created. All right, so that should take care of the fading for our game. So why don't we go ahead and test this? Well, nothing's happening. Well, that's because we haven't attached any logic to our buttons yet. So before we can see the fruits of our labor with the fading, we have to give this button some functionality. All right, so it's quite easy. What we'll do is we'll select player 1 button, and we'll go all the way down to the bottom of the inspector, and see how it has the on click little submenu. This basically is like an event. If you click, that's an event inside of Unity. If you click this button, we're going to do some things, but we don't have any arguments to commit to once we click. So to give it a new argument, we're going to press this plus button, and we need to do a few things here. We see this new entry right here. I'll zoom in so you maybe see. So it's asking for a game object that we want to affect, and then it's going to ask us what kind of function we want to run whenever we press this button. So that's easy. We'll just attach our game manager right here because our game manager has our start game function in it. So with our game manager attached, and we click right over here to no function, look what we can do. We can select game manager. Let me zoom out. or we can select our GM script right here and start game. That is the actual start game public function that we made a few minutes ago. All right, so once we click this button, we're going to access our game manager game object, and we're going to run the start game function found in my game manager script. So we're going to run this guy right here. So start game, the only thing it's going to do is adjust the fade of our overlay. So let's see what happens now. There we go. All right, but we have a few things to fix, right? We've taken care of our fade and we've built our menu and we've added functionality to our button, but nothing's spawning. We don't have control of our player, and our start menu buttons and title are still visible on our screen. So why don't we go ahead and refine that? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hide our UI elements of our start screen when we press the player one button, when we press start game as player one. We're going to hide these elements all listed in my start canvas menu. So basically we'll just do this. Turn it on and off. Okay, to do that, we're going to have to gain access in our code to our start menu canvas so we can enable it and disable it. So we're going to make another public variable. It's just the easiest way to get at these graphics. So we're going to say public canvas, and let's say start screen canvas. Let's just call it that. The same thing we're going to, oh, and I misspelled canvas. Canvas. All right, so we're going to create a public variable of type canvas. We're going to hit Control S to save this code and compile. Then I'm going to go over to my game manager, and now we have a new empty graphic type thing here. So we're just going to drag and drop start menu canvas over into this variable right here. Now we have direct access to my start screen canvas, and we can control that, enable and disable really easily. So we'll go down to my start game function now in my game manager script, and we'll say start screen canvas dot, we're going to get at the game object dot set active to false. So that line of code basically says, okay, we're going to go to the start screen canvas, and we're just going to uncheck that and see if it works. There we go. We got rid of our start UI, and we're fading in and out. So we're almost there, guys. The next thing we need to do is maybe enable our player so we can start controlling our player again. So to do that, we're going to go back in and make another public variable. And this time I'm going to put it above my public. And we're going to call it type game object. And we're going to call this player object. All right, so that's another public variable. So game manager is getting pretty crowded with all these variables, but that'll be okay. We knew that going into this. We're going to make game manager our one-stop shop for controlling the game. And we're just going to drag and drop my player into player object now. So now I have direct access to my player. I guess you could do something like this where we find the player with tags, but this is just the fastest way. We don't have to spend code searching for our player. So what we're going to say in the start game is now we're going to say player object dot game object dot set active equals true. And that's going to make our player appear immediately when we press our player one option. And it happens so fast you don't even realize that the player was invisible the whole time. So you can see in my scene view here, my player is not visible, but yet my UI elements and white fade is. So look what happens in my scene view when I press one player in my game view. Pretty nifty, huh? And all that's left to do is start spawning obstacles. And that's going to be a little bit trickier because we don't want obstacles to start spawning immediately. What if, they started spawning and the screen fade hadn't gone totally away? Well, you might be at a little bit of a disadvantage because you weren't able to clearly see the playing field. So we need to wait a few seconds before we actually start spawning obstacles into our scene here. So to do that, we're going to use a coroutine. So why don't we go ahead and call the coroutine that we haven't made yet. So we'll say start coroutine, and then we're going to call a enable spawn coroutine there. And it's pink because we actually haven't made that yet. But this coroutine is going to say, okay, after we click the button, we're going to wait like 2 or 3 seconds, and then we're going to enable the spawning of our spawn controllers. So I'm going to come down here again, and right underneath, see, there's our void fade overlay. So I'm going to create some space under here, and we're going to call IE numerator, and that's not how you do that, IE numerator, and we're going to call this, what was it, enable spawn, like so. All right, I think that's just double check that we have our, okay, enable spawn. And we're not going to pass in any parameters. We're going to just type in 3 lines of code. First, we're going to immediately wait a certain amount of seconds. So we'll do yield return new, wait for seconds. And then why don't we say, let's do about 2.5 seconds. So immediately when we call this coroutine, we're going to wait 2.5 seconds. And then we're going to get at our components on our game manager, our power up spawn controller component and our obstacle spawn controller component. We need to get at these 2 components, these 2 classes on our game manager object and check these boxes to be true. That'll start the spawning of everything in our game. So to get at those 2 guys, we're going to reference the game object that we're currently on, which is our game manager. We're going to say game. I'm just typing so well today. Game object dot get component, and then what component do we want to get? Obstacle spawn controller, and then we're going to close that off with parentheses. And then we're going to say enabled equals true, and we're going to do that the same down here. Power up spawn controller equals. So that's basically enabled. That's pretty good. And I'm going to press Control S to save and compile. That's basically going to flip the switch on my 2 power-ups here. So we're originally starting the game with them not enabled. I'll hit play. All right, nothing's happening. The game's waiting for you to make a decision. I'll hit 1 player. And then our obstacles are enabled and we can start playing. Let's show that again. All right, and I want you to keep a look. I want you to keep track of these 2 guys down here. See when they flip the switch and turn to true. All right, those 2 guys right there. So I'll press play. Nothing's happening. I'll click my first player, and boom, they flip the switch, and now everything starts spawning. And we're playing the game just like we always have been. So the menu we've created is very functional, but it's not very aesthetically pleasing. That'll be on you guys to go in and import your own graphics, your own fonts, and just have a little bit of fun creating a nice, attractive menu system. But you've got the basics down. You've learned how to fade out images. You've learned how to add functionality to the buttons in our game by attaching our scripts to our buttons when we click them. And we've created a little bit of code that makes the game look pretty cool when it first starts out. When that screen fades out, we're able to control our player, and we're able to start spawning all of our obstacles. All right, so that'll do it for this video. In the next few videos, we're going to continue with our menu system.